let me do this, let me do this.
She's going around.
In jazz, we always know how to find our way. The real rhythm and flow, of course, is going to be after this conversation with Herlin Riley and his quartet, which you'll understand that when it happens. I want to thank Charleston Jazz. This is sort of the end of the Charleston Jazz Festival, which has been a wonderful collaborator in creating a community. I'm Larry Blumenfeld. When I'm here, I'm the jazz curator of Spoleto Festival USA. On May 22nd, we kick off 17 days of a festival where we'll have our own wonderful jazz series, and I hope to see some of you there. And for several years, Charleston Jazz and Spoleto and Tatiana and her, the rest, and me have been our own community creating things. Just gonna say a couple words. I'm gonna introduce these people, and then they're gonna do almost all the talking, and then you're gonna do some talking. But, so it's people are now talking about it's the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I remember when people made a big deal about the 200th, the bicentennial, and I was a teenager then, and a little bit before that, played trumpet in high school. I didn't really know about jazz. We were playing some Duke Ellington tunes, and then Stevie Wonder had this song called Sir Duke, and he said that he was the king of them all, so I checked that out. I started to like this band, Weather Report, and they had a song that had something to do with birds, so I checked that out. Then I started to realize maybe I'll find out who Wayne Shorter is, maybe, you know. And so different roads led me to this world where when I'm not here, I write about jazz for the Wall Street Journal, for many other publications, been doing that half my life. And I will tell you that almost anything valuable I ever learned about, I mean, forget about styles of music, how to be in this world, how to have compassion, what ideas I might have about being an American, what it would mean to be a member of this country, all that I learned from jazz musicians and the community around jazz. That's really the truth. That's how I learned that stuff. That's the best part of my job. So, somewhere along the line, about 20 years ago, well, before that, I heard this man in the blue shirt, Herlin Riley, in Wynton Marsalis's Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra, the earliest stages of it. And I, wow, check out this drummer. Then I went to New Orleans, and I started writing deeply about New Orleans after the flood in 2005. What does this place really mean? And then I understood who Herlin Riley really was, and what not just a holder of all the rhythms of this place that have basically defined American music for about 100 years, but what he has meant as a community, spiritual, cultural leader in that place. And you'll find out more about that. To his left is Demetrius Doctor, who, in addition to being, please, in addition to being a pianist, organist, and I guess I learned the other night, trombonist, right? Is the director of the Charleston Jazz Academy, where yesterday, Herlin and his quartet came in and turned these students' heads around. And, you know, part of the community that is jazz is things like the academy that he leads, where for free, young musicians learn not just the notes on the page. To Herlin's right is Al Frazier, born and bred in Charleston, and who is the author of the author of To Be or Not to Bop, which is the definitive biography of another South Carolinian trumpeter, Dizzy Gillespie. Now, when I first came down here, I knew a lot about the New Orleans history, but I knew that there was this secret history of jazz development in this place that is strangely similar to the one in New Orleans, yet different. And I met this woman, Karen Chandler, who is co-founder of the Charleston Jazz Initiative and who is the holder of a lot of the knowledge that I was seeking about how did this all start? Where did it all come from? So, those are some introductions. And again, I'm glad you're in this community with us tonight. So maybe I'll start a little bit with Herlin, which is growing up in New Orleans, you know, you learn the music and the rhythms that you're going to play. But what can you tell people about how that music connected to your community and how they lived their daily life?
Well, growing up in New Orleans, I had the pleasure and the honor of hearing a lot of music from a lot of different sources, a lot of different genres. But one thing that was always prevalent was the spirit of the music. Mm-hmm. And growing up, there was always brass bands in the music. And you could hear the brass, you could hear the bass drum from 6 blocks away. That bass drum would just call you out of your house. People would turn off the pots and pans, turn the fires off, and turn off the TVs and lights, and come on outside and get into the processional. And that has always been a part of the New Orleans culture. Another thing I want to say about New Orleans is that was the only place during the time of African enslavement where the drums were allowed to be played. And that was in a place called Congo Square. And that was the only place in North America where the drums were allowed to be played. And I feel very, very privileged and honored that to be a drummer and to be standing on the shoulders of all those of my ancestors who played the drums. And the rhythms that was prevalent and played came from Africa was still around in New Orleans and is still being perpetuated today through, you know, that although it has evolved, things, you know, as everything does, has evolved. But I still feel honored that I'm standing on the shoulders of those ancestors, and I'm just happy to be here in this community. And I got to hear it the other night, boy, with this brother here, with Demetrius and Calvin Baxter, with the Gullah Collective. They were on fire. And it brought, you know, it spoke to my spirit, you know, and you know, so that's another extension of the music of the drums that has been was brought over from Africa that's still here in America. It's an extension of that, and these brothers put on a great show, and I was happy to do. I was pleasantly surprised at what I heard and what I witnessed and I experienced with the Gullah Collective. So I'm happy to be here, and hopefully I'll return sometime soon.
And yeah, that was a moment. And you know, Herlin, you mentioned Congo Square, where, you know, there were people who had their communities had been uprooted to this other place, but they really represented a bunch of different communities with different languages. And I feel like when you two got together and you're playing tambourine, it's the same tradition, but it's slightly different languages, right? They're related rhythms, but they're different. So yeah, maybe Demetrius, so the moment at the end of the night, Herlin finished his set, and then members of the Gullah Collective came up with their tambourines, and it wasn't jamming, it was something much deeper than that. So what was that moment like? What did it mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, that moment was incredible for us. Calvin C.L. Baxter, who's like the creator of Gullah Collective, I would say probably his biggest influence is his uncle Quentin,
right? And
then right after that is Herlin. And so,
oh really?
Like, he's been talking about Herlin my entire life. We've known each other since 7th grade, so he's been talking about him my entire life. But that moment of being able to communicate through what's in us, what's within us, the spirit of those rhythms that he talked about that came from West Africa, where it's almost like someone will make mac and cheese with little extra noodles down here. You go down the street, they got a little more cheese down there. You go up the street, they might put something else in it, but it's mac and cheese at the end of the day. We know what that is. And so those rhythms, when we hear that, there's a slight twinge in how it might sound, but when we hear that, it calls to what's within us, what we've been playing our entire life. And so you almost got to stop us from going on stage. Honestly, if he wouldn't have called me, I don't know if we would have been able to been stopped. But yeah, I mean, it's a celebration. It's communication. It's language. It's community. It's all of that happening really from within, kind of naturally.
Well, can you say a little bit about the community that you grew up in here and how whatever we're calling jazz related to it?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, those rhythms came from growing up in the church. It's kind of embedded in you, the gullah clap, the gullah rhythms, the gullah culture, call and response. So many of the things that we use in jazz as well. Music being a service, that's something that I try to teach my students a lot. But I learned all of that growing up playing in church, and so it's just within. It's hard to. It's a thing that's hard for me to explain a lot of times because it's not like I sat down in the classroom and learned it. I was in the pot. They were stirring the pot, and I was in the pot. So I was cooked. I was cooked in that tradition, in the rhythm, and so yeah, that community, especially around this area, you find people very quickly that understand things the same way you do musically, and it can happen instantly on the stage just like that. And so, yeah, I'm honored to be a part of that tradition and to carry it on in this area.
Did it sound like this? I know beef for mess around. I caught you in the ward walking.
Yeah, that sounds like my granny. That's my grandma right there.
No, that's what we're talking about. You know, it's very weird. You know, there are parts of New Orleans where people sound like parts of Brooklyn where I grew up. It's very strange. But it was interesting that you said being of music as service. And one thing I woke up to, especially in New Orleans, but also here, is this idea of that music as functional. Like, all right, there's a stage here. They're going to perform. You're sitting in an audience. But this music is functional in people's daily lives. It isn't just a performance is just one part of how we receive it, and maybe for some people it's never a performance. So, Karen, I know, I came to you years ago seeking some knowledge, and can you talk a little bit about why you went down this road of research and what it revealed to you about the identity of this place and what jazz has to do with it?
We started.
It'll work.
We started, and when I say we, it was a community of people who started the Charleston Jazz Initiative. One of them is here, Tony Bell, who's our videographer, photographer, video producer. Quentin Baxter, whose name we've just called the late Jack McCrae. There, I'm hearing, seeing heads bob. That's right, give it up to Jack. So Jack McCrae was aficionado here in Charleston, just an amazing writer, amazing thinker, and all things jazz. And so we actually put together a small program back in 2003. It was supposed to sort of feature, well, we talked a lot about the jazz age. And so one of the things we wanted to do at that program was to talk a little bit about the Jenkins Orphanage Band. So if you've never heard of the Jenkins Orphanage Bands, Reverend Jenkins started the bands in actually 1895. The orphanage started in 1891, but he trained or had music educators to come in and train the orphans to play musical instruments. So they didn't play jazz, but they learned musicianship and were really, really great musicians, primarily brass players, trumpet players, trombone players. And he put them on the streets in Charleston, and they raised money for the orphanage. But then they went all over the world raising money for the orphanage. And so that community of us, with myself and Quentin and Jack and Tony, joined by so many others in our community, Dr. Frazier, Leah Suarez, who's in the back, and so many others here in Charleston, we began wanting to document that story. What we knew was there was a pamphlet written by a British historian, trumpet player, John Chilton. And what was great about this small pamphlet was that it was really the beginning of a documentation of not only the orphanage bands, but also what we now know as jazz. He didn't call it that in that book. But in the back of that book were the names of many orphans who were a part of the orphanage band. So when we got started, we really didn't have a roadmap, but that names of many of the Jenkins musicians. We had their instruments. We knew their instruments. We knew what they had done musically at the orphanage, but we also knew what they had done after they left the orphanage. So I'm saying all of that to say we formed this community, began researching, and really, I think, discovered, over the years, several things. One, that the origins of jazz and the development of jazz needed a much more expanded discourse. And so it wasn't just about New Orleans, but what we understood was that, for any cultural product, it doesn't, it's not just born in one place. It doesn't just reside in, doesn't stay in one place. It moves. There's an evolution to it, and it moves from region to region. So this idea of regionality, to me, you ask, what have I learned from some of this research? How important a region is, not just New Orleans, not just Charleston, but the Gullah Geechee region. I also learned a lot about putting us, Charleston, in a context. And that context is, so what did we contribute? There are lots of cities that contributed to jazz over the years. What did we contribute in Charleston and the Low Country? And we heard it Sunday night. We heard it Sunday night.
Wow.
So I think it's that, and I think it's also just questioning what we have learned over the years. I've always heard that 1917 was the year that, somebody said jazz was born. But then through a lot of our research, we're learning and heard musicians say that they were hearing the Jenkins Orphanage bands swinging marches and hymns in 1913 and 1914. So this kind of questioning and wanting a much more expansive discourse on the origins of jazz and many cities' contributions to jazz.
I mean,
is what
you're talking about a
we've learned.
diaspora, so things will happen all along the diaspora. But
Yeah.
Jenkins, is this on? No. On now?
Is mine on?
Now we're on. That Jenkins Orphanage, some of those musicians ended up in Ellington's band
Yes, it did.
and Basie's
Basie's
band,
yeah.
right? Do
Yeah,
you
Cat
remember-
Anderson.
Cat, one of the key players in
Yeah.
early Ellington. So there was that. Also, Louis Armstrong came out of the Colored Waifs home maybe 8 years before everything you were talking about was happening in the orphanage here. So it's
Yeah.
the pictures you showed me of Black Benevolent Society
Yes,
parades
yes.
here look very much like the second line parade, earliest second line parades. It's very clear.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Well, now, Al, I know you were born and raised here, and I guess you were like Demetrius, cooked in the pot. But can you talk a little bit about this subject of your book? Because I can't think of a jazz musician who more embodies the real ideals of 250 years ago in this nation. So what drew you to a story, and What do you have? What do you think about that?
John Burks Dizzy Gillespie is a very distinguished artist and musician. He is in the field of jazz an innovator, a great innovator. People talk about innovation all the time, but they don't really often or sometimes don't understand what innovation means. Innovation means you change, a major change in something. It means that that change took place from a traditional kind of sound that was evident in the New Orleans musicians to something that was much more modern in its approach. It came and it was attached to tradition, but it had certain differences, and those differences reflected the society around it. Complicated harmonies, rhythms, reintroduction of polyrhythms, various other things that occurred with Gillespie's music and his bands that had not been present in the jazz idiom before that. Going all the way back to 1739 in this part of the country, you get the Stono Rebellion, the Stono Slave Rebellion. And the Slave Rebellion was led by a drummer who played djembes. He played djembes. Sometimes he's even referred to as Jimmy because people transliterate Jimmy to djembe.
And was of Gullah descent.
But
Was
djembe
Gullah.
is a Mende instrument. Djembe is a Mende instrument, and it was quite popular and present in early South Carolina. And it was used as a method of communication among the African people who outnumbered the European people in this section of the country by 3 times, in the 1730s. So this was a predominantly African region that people were living in. And because even though they were oppressed and under the control of a violent regime, violent slave regime, it was very difficult to keep them totally under control because of their numbers and because of their cultural proclivities. So, they created, their lives were not totally totally under the control of the people who enslaved them. They were actually producing, songs and other kinds of things that exemplified human behavior, culture, the building of culture, and that culture created what we know as the spirituals today. The spirituals are a little different from gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
The spirituals are a little deeper than gospel.
Yes, that's right.
Spirituals, you start the amen song. People say amen and don't even know why they say amen at the end of their prayers. Amen goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. So you're probably probably a word that Africans shared among themselves while they were here, enslaved, because they spoke different languages, and if they found out that 2 people spoke the same language, they tried to separate them so that they would not be able to revolt in any way. But there were these cultural ties, and one of those cultural ties was this music.
I can't even.
And so they held on to that, and even after the Stoner Rebellion, when the drums were banned, because they banned the drums after, it's written in the law of South Carolina, that you couldn't play drums anymore.
I can't even believe you're saying this because I literally just hours ago, I'm writing a review of a book written by a bassist named Melvin Gibbs in New York, and his version of a telling of Black African-American cultural history. And he talked about, I was literally just typing Stono Rebellion, and as a direct result of that, the British, who were ruling here, outlawed drumming among the quote-unquote Negro enslaved population here.
Yeah, but you could outlaw drumming, but you couldn't outlaw rhythmic impulse.
And you couldn't outlaw
And,
the
you know,
brilliance
and
of the
because-
ring shout.
Because of that,
The ring shout, which
people
said,
transferred
no drums,
rhythmic impulse to
no
other.
drums, I
other,
use my body as a drum.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You could pat your feet, you could clap your hands,
Right.
but you couldn't play something.
Right. Right.
So those were the kinds of things that
right.
kinds of songs, you know, men's song, Kumbaya, the other songs that are, you know, deep in the history of African American culture. American culture, when they started off, they played a lick, you know, that comes from a song, an African Mende song called Sinte. Sinte. Sinte is turned into shortening bread. Shortening bread. Put on lid, put on the skillet, put on. Mama's gonna make shortening bread, you know, and then bread turned into a fiddle, you know. So you're getting transformation of people and populations and musical ideas that are going to happen whether or not, you know, the regime thinks it's going to keep human thought under control. And so you begin to get a rise in this culture. And so the roots of jazz are deep in the United States, and they extend throughout the country because the people moved throughout the country. They came in at various ports, but they moved throughout the country. After 1803, people who lived in Virginia and Maryland had to go west of the Mississippi, you know, down into Louisiana, and so they carried those traditions with them. And those rhythmic traditions are what sustained and started this music and allowed it to permeate the entire American culture, and not just among African Americans, but among all Americans. Yeah.
I'd like to say, I agree with everything you all have said, and the fact is, even though the British may have harnessed the drums and, you know, banned the drums, but they couldn't harness or ban the spirit of the people. And our spirit is what has allowed this music to flourish. What we call jazz today is a living, breathing art form. It's always in the moment. It's always evolving. And so the evolution of this music is definitely comes from the bowels of our spirit. And so this music is precious, and it is America's classical music. You know, it was born here in America, and as you said, it didn't come from just one region. It didn't come from one. It may have been. It didn't come from one region. It came from the living lifestyles of the people who embodied the spirit, and in doing the in the early days of, I guess, the 1900s, when the riverboats and that kind of thing was because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the telephones, and, you know, so people moved around, and as people moved around, they brought the spirit of what they had and the rhythms that they had, and to different regions of the country, and then it became, you know, it brought life to another kind of life and another kind of consciousness to the music. And as we said, this music is America's classical music. And now, today, you know, people all over the world, I mean, all over the world are trying to play jazz music. And as I said, it's a music about freedom and about that and oftentimes we go to different places around the world, we can't even speak the language of that culture, of that region. But when we get to the bandstand and play music, everybody can come together in a harmonious kind of way.
I just, you made me think about something, and when you asked me, you know, what has our research with the Charleston Jazz Initiative revealed? And it's revealed a lot, but this idea of the music is within,
Yes.
you know, it's a part of our spirit. I've been really interested in, and I've talked to Charlton Singleton about this, and Quentin, but I've been interested in sensibility in gullah rhythm. And, you know, Charlton and I were talking, and he says, you know, you can notate some of those notes you can write down. But there is a feel with that syncopated rhythm. There's a feel that you just can't write down. There is no note. There's no note that explains what that feel, what that sensibility is. And so I just wanted to, I just wanted to share that because throughout almost, 15 or more years of this research we've been doing, there are revelations, and there are things that, you know, we learn about that that are pretty interesting. I'm amazed at, not amazed, but I'm interested in the inventiveness of so many musicians, especially jazz musicians from Charleston and the Low Country. Obviously, Diz, who created a whole genre. Cat Anderson, who could summon, you know, to play a high C at will, and it happened. James Jamerson, who was, you know, Motown, but he started out on bass, played with Pearl Bailey in the 70s, but he developed a whole technique of bass playing with that hook, and, you know, they were, Motown, they were sort of hanging on 1, 4, and 5s, and he brought chromaticism to his playing. So I've been fascinated in this research about how inventive and innovative many of these musicians are over the years.
And then after James Jamerson did what he did, the great tuba player, sousaphone player, and the Rebirth Brass Band decided to use that as the bottom for a whole new kind of brass band music in New Orleans. So it goes on and on and on and on and on, right?
You know, one thing I'd like to say is that you spoke about the innovation and about music, you know, the continuance of it. But, you know, at this point in time in history, we have to be very, very careful because now we're being challenged by AI.
Yes, we are.
And AI, but as you said, AI, he can't duplicate the spirit.
Nope.
You can't not duplicate the spirit. And so we're sitting here today, but what happens in 30 or 40 years from now? Because these kids are into the technology and all these things that goes with that. And AI is it's here. It's here. But we have to be very, very careful that how we use it. And even though it will never replace the human spirit, but, you know, they're writing songs and stuff that's, you know, with AI. You know, there's a Spotify thing on right now. I'm having some issues with Spotify because my name is they're associating my name with a lot of the things that's going on with AI, and I have no connection to AI at all. But my name is being associated with that, and so what happens in 20 or 30 years from now? You know, we know that everything evolves, but our spirit still has to evolve, and I mean, and being depending upon modern technology with AI and that kind of thing, you know, I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah, me too.
With regard to jazz in America, what are we're moving toward an economy, a leisure economy, where most of the work will be done by machines. The work most people do, even white-collar workers and people who work mainly intellectually, will be done by machines. So it will leave the human being idle unless he is creative. And I think the role that jazz has to play in all of this is maintaining and encouraging and nurturing human creativity. The creative impulse, the movement from one beat to another. What happens in that, just in that instant in the human mind, the anticipation of what one should expect from the next note, the next chord, and what that inspires in one's own creation, creative impulse. So we have jazz has an excellent chance now to really project itself. I wonder when you're going to get people on Wall Street to recognize that. And, and start investing in jazz rather than investing in bombs.
I get away
you
with
know what I'm
being
saying?
I get away with being in that paper,
but this music has been used for many, many years to take people to spread ideas.
Yeah. Also, one little
from
answer.
The time they put the trombone on the back of the beer wagon. You know what I'm saying? It was about using that impulse, using that rhythm as a means of transmitting ideas or taking the mind of the public from point to point.
I mean,
that is a key. This is a great opportunity for jazz, and especially for rhythmicists. And I was very, very, very happy to hear what happened on Sunday, because a very rhythm-forward performance occurred. You know, very rhythm forward. Never seen. I saw bass's band with playing two drums. I saw one at Coleman with two drummers. I saw other people play with two drummers, but never three. but never three. Right. But when I thought about it, it was a regular drum line. Yep. It was a regular drum line, and this was the way I learned to play djembes in a line with other drummers, and the same way this drum line was strictly in the tradition. So I'm happy to see it, and want to see jazz take full advantage of this new opportunity to bring America into its glory with music, with music that is rhythm forward as well as melodic and uplifting, spiritually uplifting. Yeah. So that's what I see as a future, even with AI.
Al, I'm glad you answered the AI question that way, and I agree with you. You know, AI, they can scrape everything they want, and they can combine it again and again, but they will, first of all, they won't write the next sentence I'm gonna write, but they will never, more importantly, no amount of scraping and accumulating data will ever match the spark that Dizzy Gillespie had when he had it with Charlie Parker, or the spark that Herlin has in the middle of a tune. But I will say one answer to that problem is what you did the other night and doing now. Support live music. Yes. Support live culture. That gets around the problem. This man that you wrote that book about, Dizzy Gillespie, I did want to point out, you know, later in his career, it was very intentional what he did. He created a group, I mean, because right now we have a lot of conversation about who should be American, who should be let into this country, who should be let out of this country, what an American might look like. Dizzy Gillespie created a United Nation band. I know my friend Danilo Perez, pianist born in Panama, just was in a version, just the idea of that band changed the course of his career and his life. I know, like, to me, don't you feel like this culture that you have talked about, that Dizzy represented, defeats the ideas that say American identity isn't all these identities?
I think
that it's global in some way, or pan-cultural?
Diz was very urbane man. liked other cultures, bookworm, liked to read, liked to think about things and opine, you know, talk about what he had learned. And so I had that was, I think, the reason we were such great friends, because, you know, I never had any brothers and sisters, so he was like an older brother, you know, to me, and that allowed me to learn, pick up a lot of stuff from him. And he was his ideas about going places, travel. Many people weren't traveling as much then as they are now. Jazz musicians always traveled. You know, they found, well, always went to places that most people didn't go, whether it was in the country or out of the country. And so you would find, you know, Sidney Bechet was in Russia before the revolution. Yeah, you know, yeah. So you'd find a lot of people, a lot of jazz musicians going around. I was shocked. I was in Egypt on a trip. This was I guess this was in 1980s, and Sun Ra was playing in Zamalek, a little island in the middle of the Nile River, you know, where all the hippies were gathered, all hippies from all over the world, you know, were gathered in Zamalek, and Sun Ra is playing in Zamalek. Sun Ra couldn't get a gig, you know, in Charleston. So what is he doing? You know, so what is he doing in Zamalek? It just goes to show you that this rhythm, you know, has attracted people from all over the world, and they gather where you least expect to find them. I was, because of Diz's penchant for travel, I was able to get around and see a lot of places that I would not have seen. His work with Chano Pozo, which reintroduced polyrhythms into the music, created a link with many cultures, particularly cultures that were polyrhythmic, and that meant all of South America and much of Europe. And so the music could travel to those places more easily because people recognize the consonance between the jazz rhythms and the polyrhythms, which had been diminished here in this country, but which were part and parcel of the music of people throughout all the rest of the American countries, and that helped it in Asia, I think, as well. So you know, jazz very popular in countries more popular, perhaps in Japan than it is in. You know,
on that
so,
note, this music, as you're saying, you're absolutely right. This music is a unifying, healing force. It's unifying and it's healing, and it sparked a thought about what Dizzy Gillespie did with the United Nations band. He had people from all different parts of the world to play in that band, and they all came together in a harmonious kind of way to create music, create something that's beautiful. I was in Russia. Winston Marcellus and I, we were just walking. We was going to find some food, and we were just walking around trying to find something to eat. We stumbled in this place, and when you know it, Louis Armstrong is playing on a loudspeaker in Russia, and it was just it was amazing that, you know, this music is so appealing around the world, and it's not just about the music; it's about the spirit of the music that's connecting people together.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, when you were talking about traveling, and you know, in some of this research, you know, just the idea of touring. So you know, we use that term a lot, but I never thought about touring in terms of the Jenkins Orphanage bands, but they toured. They toured, particularly during the summers when the orphans were finished with school, but they began touring in the early 1900s, 1912, 13. And so I wanted to mention that because there is a history of that, well, really all over, but certainly here with the bands played for the Queen in 1914, and then came back several years later, but actually started, I think the first, it wasn't a tour, but the first overseas performance was in 1896 or 7. So if, just think about that. This is an orphan band that was founded, the orphanage founded by a former slave, and he now, as an entrepreneur, is raising money, having trained the orphans to play musical instruments, and they are over across the pond in 1896, 97. It's pretty amazing. But so the idea of touring, in my mind, as a researcher, took on another level, another perspective with what happened in 1896 and 7.
It took them a while because they had to travel by boat.
They had to travel by boat. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think speaking to that some, but also going back to the United Nations band, I cautiously, as the junior member of the panel, I think so much of defining, you talked about, Larry, defining what is American and what is not. So much of it, I feel like, is to suppress human experience, to suppress human spirit. And this music, I feel like, is one of the greatest purveyors of human spirit, of defining what it is to be human. And I think so much of theming is happening, them versus us, whoever them is, whoever us is. Like, so much of that is happening to really disengage us with human spirit. And I think if we can engage with human spirit by live music, by these conversations, by listening to each other, expressing, we'll be able to understand each other musically, maybe sometimes when we can't understand each other by the words we speak. And so I think that expression of our human spirit, that to combat the suppression of, to be able to understand someone's human experience, I think that's most important of things happening right now, probably in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, not that long ago, I interviewed this Palestinian musician who was here to collaborate with American musicians, and he told me, I'm going to reach these people in a place where CNN and Fox News can't get to. And I knew what and that's how I feel about what you do. So you can tell that talking to 4 such brilliant people with such a wealth of experience, we could go on, but like I said, the real rhythm and flow, you're going to get the real rhythm and flow. So before we do that, I'm going to see if we have just one question. Oh, you were quick, man. All right. Do we have a question for one or more of our panelists?
Yes. Great conversation. Thanks for coordinating. I have a question for Karen. Having grown up in this area and playing in bands, and then learning about jazz and reading about jazz, the thing that always struck me was it seemed like Charleston was always overlooked in the history of jazz, right? So I read about New Orleans, not knocking New Orleans, certainly big. And then you'd read about bebop in New York City, you read about big swing bands in Kansas City. And the whole time I was thinking, wait a minute, what about Charleston, man? Like, Charleston, and then, and now I think that it's starting to change a little bit, but I have my theories, but I'd like to know what your theory is on why Charleston's been overlooked.
So when we began this research, what I had to do as a researcher was to go back and see what jazz historians had written about the origins of jazz. And Gunther Schuller in early jazz was probably one of the first to write about Charleston. I'm pretty sure it's on page 26, paragraph 4. So I wanted to say that because I think jazz historians, clearly jazz musicians were not overlooking it, because there are oral histories that we have heard and read that, that do explain that, yes, the Jenkins Orphanage bands were swinging those rhythms long before 1917. Now, however you want to explain that away, you know, was that the beginning of jazz? We haven't gone there yet, but the point is that they were swinging rhythms before 1917. So there were musicians and jazz historians that recognized Charleston. Gunther Schuller talks about the Charleston clap. You know, I call it the Gullah clap, but he talked about the Charleston clap. I think what it was, and I alluded to this earlier, is that it does take people, a community like we have shared over the years, to say, wait a minute, was it just New Orleans? Really? I mean, I grew up as a trained classical pianist, 2 degrees in music. First of all, I never ever heard about the Jenkins Orphanage. I never ever heard about Charleston's contribution to jazz, to music. So I think, and I have a PhD, doggone it. So it's important for us to question what we have been taught, and to dig a little deeper, that's why I use the terminology expanding the discourse. So it's not saying, no, it wasn't New Orleans. Of course it was New Orleans. But it was New Orleans and Charleston as well. Right, Baltimore, Birmingham, lots of cities around. So I think once you begin thinking about what I said earlier, is that no cultural product sort of happens in a static kind of way. You know, it happened in 1917. You know, it happened in New Orleans. That's not how this music, that's not how this culture has evolved. And so I think, yes, I agree that Charleston has been overlooked, but I think a lot of it has been that many of our musicians left Charleston. That's the key.
That's true too.
Yeah, they all left. They left, and even the orphans, they left. Joined Basie, joined Duke, Jimmy Lunsford, all of the big bands at the time. So there was no sort of growth in terms of jazz music from those musicians here on this soil. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
I'd like to comment on that. We have always had, as I was growing up here in Charleston in the 1940s and late 1940s and early 1950s, I experienced a lot of jazz music. There were local bands. My best friend's father was a bass player, Louis Gilliard, and he had a band, big dance band. There were several Carolina Stompers, Frank Flood, and a number of other musicians. So there were always musicians around Charleston who were playing jazz music. The public school, the development of the public school played a role in this as well. My father was Wilmot J. Frazier was a principal, and Mr. Blake, who taught the orphans at Jenkins, also taught music at Archer. So there was, in the public school, Archer was established the year I was born in 1939. And my father had a bandmaster to come in, Mr. Blake, and he later on was replaced by Fletcher Linton, who taught me. Fletcher was the brother of Charlie Linton, who was the male vocalist for Chick Webb's band. So when Ella was the female vocalist. So there was always this contact and this ferment of people going back and forth. There's a boat that's leaving soon for New York. Yeah, yeah. Come with me.
I want to make a little small comment on that.
Yeah, so there's always traveling happening. Sorry. Yeah. And so that's the.
I'm sorry.
You on top of it.
I didn't mean to step on you. I didn't mean to step on you.
You're right on the beat, man. Get it.
Part of keeping the music alive and keeping the music, drawing attention to the music is having, first of all, people to support it.
Right.
People you are here, you're supporting this music, and I always make the analogy that the music, the art form that we're dealing with, is a living, breathing art form, but also it's like the queen bee. It's the queen bee, and we all are the workers to keep the bee alive. Not only the musicians, but also the people who support it and buy the records and so forth. Right. And so part of that is that support is having a venue for musicians to play and develop, and also having people to support it. Right. And I think a lot of times when people, in the early days, a lot of musicians, probably left here because they went to New York. There were venues to play. Right. There were people who supported the music, who came out and checked it out, and so people. I had a conversation last night with Tatiana about having a jam session for younger people in this town. They're doing it once a month, whereby young people, because a lot of times younger musicians are practicing. They're in the practice rooms, but they don't have any place to play. They don't have any place. So creating a place to play for them to develop and to develop the music would definitely help to shine a light on the region, because we need a place. We need some place to play, and we need people to support it.
And I just want to add one thing to this conversation, because I think it's important that that our musicians are supported. But what we have here in Charleston is really pretty unique, that we've got an awesome jazz community of musicians, but we also have the research into that, the part of it that says, okay, let's kind of understand a little bit more the origins of jazz, the roots of jazz here in Charleston. So we've got both of those angles here in Charleston, which is, I don't know other cities that have the same kind of thing, but the fact that there is also some kind of an effort that seeks to understand what you do and to explain it to others is important.
All right, we're gonna entertain one more question, and then we're gonna get to music.
An acknowledgement, if you will. All of the children that played in the bands were not orphans. For instance, examples, George Kenny, the late George Kenny Jr., and Lonnie Hamilton, who taught me at Jenkins Orphanage. Mr. Blake started out teaching me. His son and I were god sister and god brother, and my parents, godson. And my parents were the administrators that went out and made appeals for Jenkins Orphanage. I grew up there. We wouldn't be here today if it was not for Dr. Al, our cousin, Mr. Alfonso Brown, retired educator, and my cousin, the great-grandson of D.J. Jenkins, Mr. Tupper Zimbabwe.
Wow. Oh, man. Wow. That was as beautiful as that tambourine ending. That was the perfect ending there. This was the perfect ending here. And I want to thank you for that question, because over decades of doing what I do, I came to the realization that this country is very good at what I call erasure of history. But when you say that, and we have conversations like this, that is how we retain even more. When I hear like Demetrius or Herlin, that is really how we retain our, you know, the great Sidney Bechet from New Orleans, his autobiography is called Treated Gentle, but he really wanted to call it the Remembering Song. That was his title for it. So listen, we're gonna, I don't want you to applaud and thank Herlin right now because later you will be doing a much better version of that. But I want to thank Demetrius, Dr. Al Frazier, Karen Chandler, and all of you for this wonderful opportunity to talk.
Well, thank you.
Well, is he even out here? Let's see where he is. Let me go around.
Yes, I know that. Yeah. All right. This was a what, hit out of the park, as they say?
Thanks for coming to all the events. Oh yeah, everyone. I was like, I think